What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins. I am your co-host, Hussam Patel. Joining me today is our other co-host, Eric Whitticky. Eric, how are we doing today, my guy?
Doing all right. Just got off work, ready to talk some undrafted free agents. I'm feeling good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well as well. Coach is not with us today. He's out for, I believe, what is a hockey tournament for his kids. So best of luck to his kids. Today we're joined by a friend of the podcast, Dante Collinelli. Dante, how are we doing today, my guy?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Dante, Eric, and I have been following your work, and you've done a lot of work on the UDFAs. And, it's kind of hard to find these guys' as film. So we wanted to get your insights and see, who the Dolphins have signed, what their prospects are. And Eric would really like to talk to you about one specific defensive back from this group.
Yeah, well, I always like to start with, because I know who I know who you think the best of the UDFAs are. But setting that aside for a second, when you just consider fit into what the Dolphins want to do, of the 15 guys signed, which one has been your favorite signing thus far?
Oh, my favorite signing. I think it's probably Andrew Armstrong from Arkansas. I just think that I have been banging the drum for the Dolphins to invest in bigger receivers for a few years now. Like, I know that became a mainstream thing to bang the drum for this past year. I've been banging the drum for that for years now. And Armstrong's a player who I had a high 5th round, low 4th round grade on. So I really like him. I think from a contested catch perspective, his size, his toughness, ability to make plays downfield through coverage, ability to make plays in the middle of the field, taking on contact, making difficult catches. That's a skill set that I think the Dolphins need. I think they'll get some of that with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. But I like the idea of adding more players who can bring that skill set to the table. So was not my number one overall undrafted free agent. I think he was number 2 on my rankings, if I'm not mistaken, but probably my personal favorite. I really enjoyed his tape, and I like what them continuing to invest in these types of players says about the evolution of the offense.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Yes, I mean, the thing with a guy like Armstrong that I like personally, and I really, really like the Andrew Armstrong signing myself, is he's not a guy that's strictly a jump ball catcher who's going to strictly, like, he's got some really, I would say, underrated run after catch ability, and some of the things that you see him do at Arkansas. But I totally agree. I think adding some of what he does to the receiver room is vital. You need a little bit more physicality out there on the outside for this offense. But speaking of physicality along the outside, now we're going to get into the defense. Actually, Hussam, you go first on Armstrong. My apologies. I jumped the gun.
We're very excited today.
I know.
You are very excited today. Like, still on the topic of Armstrong, 6'4", 200 pounds, leading SEC pass catcher as well. I mean, Dante, you're right. They've been needing a big-bodied pass catcher for a while. And I feel like Armstrong, if he does really well in minicamp, I do think he might have a really good shot of making the main 53, because he also blocks as well. Like, if you think about it, he's like a Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in a way. Like, if Armstrong is able to do exactly the same type of things Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is able to do in terms of blocking specifically, I think that makes him susceptible, and the Dolphins may be able to cut their losses financially. You had a 5th round grade on him. Does this mean that for the Dolphins, for how they paid him as well, because I believe he got $300,000, a $300,000 contract, Do you think that solidifies his role for Miami's 53?
I mean, I think it's a really good sign, right? If you're a UDFA and you get that type of payday, I think it's a good sign that you're going to make the roster. I think the receiver room has a lot of open spots, right? If you look at, who the actual receivers are that are going to make an impact this year, right? It's probably Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Nick Westbrook-Ikine. And then after that, I think you have a lot of open spots. I think you have a lot of snaps. I think you have a lot of opportunities. And I think Armstrong is in a position to where he could be a player who fits and rounds out that room nicely, right? I think you want to invest in players as backups who have duplicative skill sets. So you brought up a great point saying, hey, you can do a lot of the blocking things that Nick Westbrook-Ikine can do. So it's good to have, hey, he's the Nick Westbrook-Ikine backup, right? And we'll have the other, 5'9", 4'2" guys back up Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, however you want to do it, right? So I think it's a really good sign. They brought in a bunch of receivers as UDFA. I think there's going to be a really competitive battle there. It's difficult to predict which UDFAs are truly going to make it, just because a lot of times it comes down to almost coach and position coach preference when those decisions are made, right? The GMs will kind of go in and they have an idea, but a lot of the times that's going to come down to, hey, this guy just had a really good 2 weeks, even if his, college tape wasn't as good as another guy. But I think Andrew Armstrong is a really good shot.
Yeah, there's another one, Theo Weiss Jr., who also makes Nick Westbrook-Ikine expendable as well. We're seeing a little bit of clips from him where he's able to take some screen passes. He's able to line up in the slot. He's also a bigger body guy, 6'3", 200. He received $230,000 in guaranteed money, which was among the highest for UDFAs. And I think that also says that's a pretty good shot for him to potentially make the roster. Red zone, big third down target, complements Tyreek and Jalen Waddle well. Potentially maybe wide receiver 4 or 5, depending on what happens with Nick Westbrook-Ikine, maybe if Andrew Armstrong or Malik Washington, Taj Washington, to see how those camp battles out. I do think his guaranteed money, especially his physical tools, I think that will give him an edge to make it alongside Andrew Armstrong. And I think these two wide receiver additions, I don't think it bodes well for a guy like Malik Washington or even Taj Washington, which the Dolphins drafted last year.
I would even I would even go further to say maybe not Malik Washington or Taj Washington. I think if there's a guy that's kind of looking over his shoulder in the wide receiver room right now, it's rightfully Eric Ezukanma, who was supposed to kind of give you some of those same things, and it just hasn't panned out to this point. And he really, to me, if I'm doing, if we're mocking up a wide receiver depth chart in May, which is among the things you do in the NFL offseason, yeah, I don't think he'd be on it right now. Am I wrong in assuming that?
I don't think you're wrong. No, I'd be pretty surprised if he makes the 53 at this point. I think it's going to be a straight battle in the preseason between him, Armstrong, Theo Weiss Jr. I think the Malik and Taj, I think, serve very different roles than those players. And so I think it'll come down to, I think Malik will make the team off of special teams value. I think he's probably going to be in the mix as the primary returner. And I think that they really like him. Taj will be interesting. Didn't get to see him much last year. So I think him and Eric Ezukanma, I wouldn't be surprised if they lose out to Theo Weiss and Andrew Armstrong. And then that's the room, right? It's Jalen, Tyreek, Malik, Nick Westbrook-Ikine, Andrew Armstrong, and Theo Weiss. Wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, the Dolphins are getting younger, faster, stronger, bigger. And I think that was the theme of this draft and even this UDFA draft class. Dante, you had Jalen Conyers as your number 1 UDFA signing. Tell us a little bit as to why you think he's your favorite, and do you think he has a shot to be part of this tight end group?
Yeah, so he's my favorite because I watched him towards the end of the process, and I was speaking with Kyle Krabs, who I used to work with at the 33rd team, and Kyle had kind of mentioned to me, he said, hey, like, watch him. He's a Mike McDaniel guy. And I watched him and I was like, that's a Mike McDaniel guy, right? So I think a lot of the reasons I feel that way is they like to take these project tight ends, these tight ends who can do a lot of different things from an athleticism perspective, and kind of work with them over time, right? Like Connor was like that coming out of Idaho.
Yeah,
A little bit of Julian Hill, right, coming out of BYU. I'm blanking on the kid they drafted from Stanford's name a couple years ago.
Elijah Higgins,
right? So it's a lot of those types of tight ends. And when I watched Conyers, I felt like he was another one of those really athletic, smooth. The route tree is not overly expansive, but when I think you watch him, you see a little bit more nuance than you were expected. He knows how to set guys up a little bit and stem his routes and change his step cadence and different things like that. He has a lot of room to grow. He has a lot of work to do. I'm not saying he's a polished route runner by any means, but you see the bare bones of a player who can be a really good, efficient route runner, strong pass catcher, has good hands, can extend away from his frame, make catches through contact. I think I had a fourth round grade on him as well, kind of in that same bucket as Andrew Armstrong. So this was a player who, I probably had a fringe top 160, 170-ish grade on my overall board. So for the Dolphins to get him as a UDFA is just, I think, really good value. I think he has the ability to develop over time and become a really good piece of a tight end room. I even think he's got some interesting skills as a blocker. Now, he needs a lot more development as a blocker than he does as a receiver, but size-wise, I think he has enough size to where you can say, hey, we're going to try and bulk this guy up, get his technique better, and let him play on the line and block for you a little bit. So I really like Conyers as a dart throw. I just think he's got a ton of tools. The Wildcat quarterback stuff's really fun. I don't think they're going to do anything with that, but it's fun. Cool player. And again, just my highest rated player, frankly, that they signed. And I think he has a shot to, unseat the Julian Hill, Tanner Connors of the world, whether that's the practice squad or the final 53, whatever that ends up being. I think he has a chance.
I feel like he's going to be that developmental piece where in 2 to 3 years, when the Dolphins move off of Jonnu Smith, that Jalen Conyers' role is going to be the Jonnu Smith role, where he's the F tight end in the motions. He's able to line up as a big slot type of guy, as the Z. He can line out wide. He can come in as the motion man on an insert block, chip in as well, and maybe just like he's got the yak. He's got a little bit of speed. If his blocking improves, I think he becomes tight end too for Miami.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing to me with Conyers is, you're right. He is a lot in kind of the mold of a Julian Hill or a Tanner Connor or Elijah Higgins, but I think you're dealing with a guy that is, now granted it's a low bar, but he is more polished as a tight end overall than any of those guys were initially. And you look at the size at 6'3", 260, for him to have that athleticism at that size, this is a guy that I think he averaged, what was it in 2023, like 10 plus yards after catch per reception. So he knows what to do with the ball in his hands. There's definitely a good foundation to work with. It's going to be up to McDaniel and John Embry and the coaches to kind of get the most out of him, from that position group.
Yeah, he's slippery after the catch for a bigger guy. Like, he just kind of slips around contact a little bit. He's quicker in tight spaces than I was expecting him to be. I think I always struggle watching guys in that Texas Tech offense because it's a deeply unserious offense to translate to the NFL level. But I think you see a lot of the building blocks of a player who can be, very successful long-term, right? You see a lot of NFL building blocks. The route tree is not what I want it to be. It's never going to be what I want it to be from that offense. But again, I think you see enough that he can really be, if he's Jonnu Smith heir apparent, I mean, that's great. That's a huge hit as a UDFA. Yeah. So, and I think he has the raw skills to do that. Whether or not he gets developed, like you said, is going to be down to the coaching staff.
Yeah. All right. As we move on to the running back group, they had signed Ollie Gordon. They have their starters in Devon Achane and Jalen Wright. A fringe guy who might come unexpectedly could be Nate Noel out of Missouri. That Missouri offense was a bit like the Shanahan style we saw Theo Weiss Jr. Also from Missouri get signed by the Miami Dolphins as a UDFA. And I think Knowles' vision fits in what Miami wants to do. And I think because Eric, coach, and I have came to realize that the Dolphins may convert Devon Achane to a Weapon X style where he catches a lot of passes this season compared to last season, whether it be on screens, boots, lines up as a receiver. I think what we're going to see out of training camp, and I think this upcoming season, I think Devon Achane won't have that running back role that we saw in 2022. I'm sorry, in 2023. I think we'll more see the 2024 type of Devon Achane where he's catching passes. And it opens up where Jalen Wright, Ollie Gordon, and Nate Noel are able to run on those wide zone schemes, able to utilize their visions, able to see those holds, and even catch passes out of the backfield. I think the Dolphins may go towards a pony type of look where they use two running backs more, and maybe Alec Ingold and Jonnu Smith as the tight ends in the formation. Eric, what are your thoughts on?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, I my apologies. No, I think it kind of hits at what Dante was mentioning with the wide receiver room earlier, with Andrew Armstrong and Theo Weiss kind of acting as that Nick Westbrook-Akine backup. Either one of those guys. I think Nate Noel comes in and kind of, I think it's a long shot that he makes the 53-man roster. Just given what's in front of him on the depth chart. And I don't think the Dolphins are going to carry, more than 4 running backs, which granted, I don't think it's a given that Alex Madison makes the roster. And I certainly hope it's not a given he makes the roster. I think Nate Noel kind of gives you that facsimile of HN in terms of the running style, the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I think he kind of gives you that. Whereas if you remove HN from the running back before a guy like Nate Noel shows up, he's the only guy that gives you even close to that skill set. So I that's kind of the vision that I would have for Nate Noel right now, is to kind of be that guy that, maybe hangs around on the practice squad. If anything happens to Devon Achane, he can kind of step in and be that guy to catch passes out of the backfield.
Dante, would you rather have Nate Noel or Alexander Madison?
Oh, man. That's a horrible question to ask me. Probably Nate Noel. I got to be honest. I waited a while to watch the Alexander Madison tape because I didn't want to. And you know what? I was real for that. It was not good last year. I think it's a player who just – unfortunately is just not the same guy that he was a few years ago already. And that sucks. But, the short yardage numbers for Madison are a bit deceiving. If you actually watch those reps, it's a lot of the Raiders offensive line getting downhill and making his life easy. And that's saying a lot because the Raiders offensive line was not very good at run blocking specifically last year. So I'd probably take Nate Noel. I think scheme fit wise, I like what he brings to the table in the outside zone scheme. I think he has the vision for it. I think he ran it a lot at Missouri. So I'd be hard pressed to find a running back who the Dolphins could bring in at the back end of the depth chart that I would not want over Alexander Madison, just because I don't think Madison has any juice left, unfortunately. But we'll see. Maybe the South Florida sun revives something in him, or we'll see what the preseason looks like. But I would rather give the short yardage carries to Jalen Wright or Ollie Gordon, if I'm being honest. So I don't really know where Madison fits in, and I'd rather see Noel.
Yeah, he had 5.5 yards per carry in for his career average, 818 yards in 2024 at Missouri, 1,126 yards in 2021 at App State. Shifty back, decent size practice squad candidate for sure, but could potentially make it if he beats out Alexander Madison for that third or maybe fourth running back role. All right, we'll move on to the defense. Dante, were you at the Senior Bowl this year by any chance?
I was down on the field for the Senior
You were
Bowl.
down on the field, so you may have,
field.
you were down on the field, so you may have seen the UDFA signing from Auburn, Eugene Asante. Talk to him about us.
So I didn't get as good of a look at the linebackers during that week, but I think Asante popped for his competitiveness, right? Like when you're down on the field, you kind of get to hear the guys. You get to, interact with them a bit. How are they in the huddle? Are they trying to pop pads even though they said don't pop pads, right? Like you get to hear those guys. You get to see those guys do things. And I think he really stood out from that point of view, right? Like you could hear him. You could see him flying around the field, trying to make plays, different things like that. And I think you see a lot of that when you watch the Auburn tape. I think you see a high effort player with, some nice athletic tools who I think can play a little bit of edge. I think he play a little bit of off linebacker. I think there's some different things that you can do with him. And I think they tried him in a few spots down in Mobile, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's, a really interesting profile for UDFA, right? Like I think half the battle for these guys is what do you bring on special teams? I think Asante, given his effort, his size, the athletic profile, I think at a baseline level, he gives you a little bit of juice on special teams. And that's what I usually look for second and, third level players on the UDFA side. And in Mobile, I think you saw a guy who just loves football, man. And I think that's been a big theme of the Dolphins offseason. I think that extended even into this UDFA signing.
Yeah, I think a guy like Asante, the thing that, interests me, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, is, just looking at the production at the SEC level in, 2023 and 2024. I like that he's a more experienced guy because he feels like a player that, I mean, again, I look at a guy at the back end of the depth chart at the linebacker room in Channing Tindall, and I look at Asante, and I'm not. Again, Asante is a UDFA for a reason at this point, but Channing Tindall hasn't really done much in his first two seasons to say that he's a lock for this roster at the linebacker spot, especially when he's behind, four guys now. You're talking about a fifth linebacker here. Is it that crazy to suggest that Asante can come in and kind of like he can come in and take that spot?
No, I don't think that's crazy at all. I think it's going to come down to special teams. I think both of those guys, I'm sure they're going to get reps at linebacker during the preseason and all that stuff. Effectively, to me, for them, it's going to be how much can you do kick coverage? What can you block on punt, right? Like that's what it's going to come down to for those guys. And I think Asante, I don't know Tyndall. I was not on the field with him for the Senior Bowl. I don't remember if Tyndall went to the Senior Bowl off the top of my head. But like Asante was a really high effort guy, man. He was flying around the field, trying to make plays, even though, he wasn't one of the best guys at that event. I think you came away from that event feeling good about how he competed. And look, like you said, when you're in a battle for an LB5 spot as one of the last guys on the 53-man roster, probably, that is something that could make the difference. I'm not saying that Tyndall doesn't have that in him either. I don't know. We haven't really seen much from him, quite frankly. So it's not crazy at all. It really isn't. I think Asante's got an interesting path to the roster. I think the bigger question is how many linebackers do the Dolphins actually want to carry, I think is probably the bigger question. Because you have, your two starters probably in Dodson and Brooks. And then you have, guys like Willie Gay Jr. and KJ Britt. That's already four, right? So do they want to carry a fifth linebacker at all? I'm not really sure. But if they do, it's going to come down to special teams. And I think Asante has a real shot to outperform Tyndall there.
Certainly. Go ahead. Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing, obviously, that they kind of addressed heavily in UDFA that they didn't address necessarily during the draft was the defensive back room. They signed John Saunders. They signed BJ Adams, and then Ethan Robinson, I believe it is, out of Minnesota. Saunders is a really intriguing prospect at safety for his size. He's a guy that was a turnover, forced a lot of turnovers at Ole Miss. And when you have that kind of production and that kind of size, it kind of you wonder why a guy like that kind of fell under the radar. What are the flaws, I guess, when it comes to a guy like John Saunders that, the league, hey, he doesn't do this very well. Like what is he missing from being a guy that was taken, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th round?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't watch him before the draft, so I watched him post-draft, and I ended up with a draftable grade on him. So I was kind of surprised that he was a UDFA player. I would tell you that I think his tape's better than Dante Trader Jr.'s, who the Dolphins took in the 5th round. I would have had a higher grade on John Saunders. But I think watching the tape, what kind of sticks out to me is I think you have a player who is a jack of all trades, master of none type of deal, right? He does a lot of good stuff. He's around the ball, high effort player, high football intelligence. There's a lot to work with there. But I think when you look at Saunders, I don't really know, what is my standout trait, right? Like, are you a coverage guy? Are you a run support guy? Are you, do you have really good range? Are you a man coverage player, right? Can I match you up against tight ends, leave you in the slot, right? I'm not saying he can't do any of those things, but I think going into camp, I think one of the things that the Dolphins are going to have to figure out is like, okay, like, what is the best place where we can get the best version of this player? And I think that can be kind of tricky. I like the player. I think he's got a chance to make the roster as well. Like I said, I think the college tape is better for him than it was for Dante Trader Jr. I like safeties who are around the ball. That's a really no duh thing to say, but it does matter. I like guys who are around the ball a lot, and he's around the ball a lot. And, good things happen when you have a high effort mentality and you're around the football. And so I think the Dolphins need a lot of those guys across the roster, across the defense. So I'm surprised based on what I watched that he went undrafted. I think ultimately it probably boiled down to teams saying, hey, I'm going to draft a specialist later in the rounds, right? I don't know necessarily where I'm going to put Saunders, but I need a safety who plays in the slot. So I'm going to go draft Caleb Bransall is a bad example because he went on day 2, but that type of player, right? A safety who specialized in playing in the slot over somebody like Saunders, who's kind of, you can play him in a bunch of different areas, but what's his best position? Where am I getting the most bang for my buck with him? That's really the only thing I can think of. And, I don't know the guy, so I'm not going to dip into any off-field stuff.
Right.
I have no idea. Seems like a good kid from what I've read so far. So that's what I can kind of glean from the tape.
Yeah, I think it's just how he does during preseason, how he does well on the special teams coverage, if he can force any fumbles, make splash plays, because that safety group right now is pretty loaded, especially after drafting Dante Trader Jr., signing Fiatu Melifonwu and Ashton Davis. As for cornerback, Eric's favorite UDFA signing, BJ Adams, and he said that he thinks he's pretty much going to make the roster. 6'2", 182 pounds, long, plays press, and 4.5 through 40, but he went undrafted. Watching this guy, you think, okay, they took Jason Marshall Jr. in the draft, but signed BJ Adams as a UDFA. Now, if you switch that, you'd be like, okay, that makes sense, drafting BJ Adams and then signing Jason Marshall Jr. as a UDFA. But why did that not happen? Just based off the tape itself. Dante, what did you say? What did you see from BJ Adams and Jason Marshall Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I would have had these guys flopped. Frankly, if you flop Adams for Marshall and Saunders for Trader, I feel a lot better about this draft class. But I mean, those are low value spots. So it's whatever. They ended up with a good group of players either way. So I think the reason you saw Adams slip a bit is press corners who run 4.53 is going to be a tough sell in a lot of rooms. It just is. It's not you want guys with a little bit more juice than that. And I think you watch him on tape, he doesn't look slow to me, but he doesn't look fast either. So, I mean, like, you know, even if he's a 4-5 guy flat, like that's still going to be a tough sell for certain teams. And I think the other thing too is he's really inconsistent. I don't know. I like him in press because of the natural tools, but the press technique is not what I want it to be. He is not a player that I want, you know, playing press against high caliber NFL route runners right now. I think he'll get beaten pretty succinctly right off the line. I think he's inconsistent with the way that he, matches at the line of scrimmage and his technique, the accuracy of his jams, different things like that. But from a tools perspective, from the skills that he has, yeah, he's a press corner. And I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about because the Dolphins under Anthony Weaver, not a heavy press team. So that's an interesting kind of, I don't want to read too much into it. It's a UDFA signing. It's not like they gave him a big contract or anything, but an interesting profile for a team that doesn't play a ton of press under Anthony Weaver. But I like Adams. I would have had a draftable grade on him as well.
Yeah, we have gained some knowledge, and we've said it on, I believe, 2 episodes ago that we have gotten news that it looks like Anthony Weaver is looking to play a little bit more press this season compared to last year. And I think that's what we saw in the signings of Jason Marshall Jr. and BJ Adams. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to a guy like Adams, his length does a lot of work for him in trying to make up for that elite athleticism. Like I guess, from the perspective of if you're just looking at upside with the raw athleticism that a guy like Marshall has, and if he reaches, the form that he had early on in his career at Florida, maybe you can make something out of him as a boundary corner at the next level. But I think with Adams, it's just he's just a better football player on tape right now. In terms of, the press coverage, being able to bring sticky coverage, like he doesn't get outright beat that often. But ultimately, and in a corner room that's as in flux as this one is, to put it lightly, he's got a legit chance right now to be one of the top 4 guys going into next year. Pending what happens with Jalen Ramsey, we'll see how that soap opera ends up playing out. But I like Adams. Like I said, I think he was the best corner that the Dolphins acquired over the weekend of the draft. Like I said, I think if there's a guy that I would put my money on to be the Storm Duck, quote unquote, of this year's UDFA class, it would be BJ Adams.
All right, finally, the Dolphins did sign an offensive lineman from Michigan, Josh Preby. And one thing I saw online, and Coach pointed it out, that someone had told him that he was the most consistent lineman for the Wolverines group last year. Dante, have you watched any tape on Preby, and do you think he has a shot to make this roster?
I've watched a little bit of tape, not an overly deep dive. I'd be pretty surprised if he made the roster, and I don't really know that is an indictment on him, more so as it is I think the Dolphins kind of have a lot of pieces in front of him that are just, everyone likes to crap on Liam Eichenberg. At the end of the day, I think he's a valuable backup for you. I think you want him to be your 7th or 8th offensive lineman, but as a 7th or 8th offensive lineman, I think Liam Eichenberg probably beats out somebody like Josh Preby, which it isn't really his fault. And I think if you watch the Michigan tape, you understand why the Dolphins were willing to take a shot on him. I think a player who sets a really good baseline in a lot of areas. I don't really know that he stands out as an athlete. I don't know that his power stands out, but he's not a bad mover. He's not getting bullied either. Technically sound player. He knows what to do with his hands. I think he works combo blocks well, some different things like that. I think a worthwhile dart throw, but I'd be pretty surprised if any of the UDFA offensive linemen make the team. I just think that they have their 5 starters. I think that they brought in, Larry Borum. I think Eichenberg probably beats all these guys out, as much as I'm sure people don't want to hear that. I'd be kind of surprised. At the end of the day, he can play all 5 positions and he knows the scheme. You could do a lot worse for your 8th offensive lineman. It's just that the NFL, man, there's not a lot of good offensive linemen anyway. So your backups, if they're versatile and they know the scheme, like that's a huge advantage for you at the end of the day. And so I think it's going to be an uphill battle, but look, I mean, the tape's okay. If he comes out and somebody gets hurt and he's able to kind of fill that role and kind of ride that into, a practice squad, that wouldn't surprise me either. Cause you watch the tape and you go, okay, like this guy has the baseline skills of an NFL offensive lineman, but I don't really know that you ever see him as a potential starter, high-end contributor, or anything like that. I think he's ultimately just a guy who solidifies the back end of your room as a 7th or 8th type of player, and you try to hope that he can learn guard and center maybe as well. I don't project him to center, but you got to teach all those guys those positions. So that's probably his role, and that's probably his best shot. So I'd be pretty surprised if he made the final roster.
Is he, in your estimation, the best offensive lineman UDFA that they added?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you turn on the tape, one of the things that I look for immediately for late round offensive linemen is, okay, like, are you NFL strong? Right? Because like if you're not, like, I don't care how quick you move. If you're a 6th round pick, I'm moving on. He has enough strength to be an NFL lineman. And so I think when you check that box as a bottom of the roster type of offensive lineman, I think you have a chance. So for me, the other guys, again, I didn't do super deep dives on the other guys, but for me, like the 2 Western Michigan kids, I have a little bit of questions overall with their raw natural strength. And I think, look, when you're looking at UDFAs, one of them went to Michigan and he held up well against some, really good Big Ten defensive linemen who went on days 1 and 2 of the NFL draft. Like, I think that means a little bit something to me too. So that's where I'm at with the UDFA offensive linemen. I'd be pretty surprised to see any of these guys kind of stick unless it's the practice squad.
Yeah. So the Dolphins 2025 UDFA class is bigger than recent years. They have 15 UDFA signed, 7 in 2024. And this year's class includes more players with draftable grades, kind of like that 2019 season that produced Nick Needham and some other guys as well. We talk about Cater Kohu as one of the biggest UDFA signings as of recent. Who do you think will be the biggest UDA? Who do you think will have the biggest impact out of this 2025 UDFA class?
That's a really good question. I think what Eric mentioned earlier in BJ Adams, I think the first thing that I look for UDFA having a long-term impact is the opportunity, right? Like, do they even have a chance? I think if you look at the cornerback room, I mean, if Ramsey is gone before the season, which, Lord knows how that's going to work out. But, if he is gone before the season, I mean, they might have me out there at boundary corner. So I think BJ Adams has a really good shot to not only make the 53-man roster, but like play meaningful football in year 1. I don't know if that's week 1, whatever, but Storm Duck made the team last year, played meaningful football as a UDFA. And so Adams is coming into the group now where you have Cater Kohu, who he's okay. Like, he's a good player. I'm glad that he's back. He can give you some versatility, but I think ideally he's probably your cornerback 3, right? In a good room, right? Like, he's probably your 3rd corner. He's going to be CB1. And behind him, it's Storm Duck, Ethan Bonner, Jason Marshall, BJ Adams. They just cut Ryan Cooper today. They brought in Artie Burns, right, as kind of like this veteran special teams type guy. Like, man, that's a winnable starting job if I've ever seen one. So my prediction would be for Adams, and then obviously I'd hate to miss out on talking about Conyers again. I just really think he has the skills to be a reliable NFL tight end, whether that's as a primary pass catching option who doesn't give you much as a blocker, or you take a more long-term developmental track with him and bulk him up and give him more strength and let him use that length and that frame as an inline player. But I think he's got a bit more of an uphill battle to climb on the depth chart than BJ Adams does.
Eric, outside of BJ Adams, who do you think will make the top 53?
So right now, I think you're looking at probably the four UDFAs make the roster this year. I would say Jalen Conyers, Andrew Armstrong, Eugene Asante, and then BJ Adams. Those would be my 4. John Saunders would be an honorable mention for me because I think that in the safety room, while there's a lot of names there, it's kind of like the cornerback room where you've got like 6 or 7 names, but you're just not sure how they all end up sorting out. I'm sure Davis, Melifon, Wu, and Campbell end up making the roster at corner, but then you've got Patrick McMorris, you've got Dante Trader, you've got John Saunders. Like, it's kind of a dart throw with those guys. But I feel really good saying Armstrong, Conyers, Asante, and Adams make the 53-man roster this year.
Yeah. Historically, the Dolphins have included maybe 3 to 4 guys in their initial 53-man roster. Kind of like players like a Nick Needham, Kader Kohu, Julian Hill, sometimes maybe even Tanner Connors. I feel like in 2025, Jalen Conyers and BJ Adams are the most likely to make it, just due to the fit, the need, the guaranteed money. I think Theo Weiss Jr., Andrew Armstrong, and Eugene Asante have a strong chance if they excel on special teams. And depending on what happens with that wide receiver room with Tyreek Hill, do they keep him after June 1st? Do they trade him? I think that's going to be something to watch throughout the offseason. We do know that the Dolphins just released Blake Ferguson earlier today, so long snapper Neelan Hibbett could sneak in unless they sign someone else. And I think the other candidates are just likely bubble candidates for the practice squats or on cut down day. And so, Dante Collinelli, thank you so much for joining us.
Wait. You
want to discuss more?
I want to discuss one more thing. And this goes out to all the lovely Dolphins fans on Dolphins Twitter. You've done extensive research on Dolphins 7th round quarterback Quinn Ewers. And I've come away realizing he's probably one of your favorite prospects at the position. Could you tell us why he's the Dolphins starting quarterback for 2025 and beyond?
I
didn't
realize Quinn was part of this UDFA draft class, Eric.
He should have been. My thing with Ewers is that it's hard for me as somebody who just sits down and watches tape to wrap my mind around the hype that comes with being a 5-star recruit like 4 years ago. He's a 7th round pick. If he turns into a really good backup, that's a great pick. And I'm not going to complain about that. And I like Quinn, the dude. I think Quinn has the mentality. He's tough. He came from a winning program. That's a fine dart to throw in the 7th round. But I think my frustration largely is independent of Quinn Ewers specifically and more about how the Miami Dolphins have managed the backup quarterback position this offseason. I think, another thing that I've been banging the table for a couple of years now is, hey, give me a guy with traits, right? Like, I want to see traits. And they went and got Zach Wilson. It's just like the worst name that I could possibly name of the traits quarterbacks. And it's like, all right, like, sure, I guess. And then they drafted a player in Quinn Ewers who, like, traits-wise, comparably, I would tell you, has similar arm strength capabilities to Skylar Thompson. And so it's difficult for me to feel really good about Ewers and where he falls, given that I don't really know that the backup quarterback spot is better this year than it was when they had Tyler Huntley back there. Like, that's my problem with Ewers, is that, like, I watched the tape and it's fine to take quarterback in the 7th round. There's nothing wrong with that. If he's a solid backup, that's a good pick. I like to take quarterbacks late in the draft with some tools that I can develop. Quinn cannot move. He is a statue pocket passer with limited arm strength. To me, that is not the profile of a player that I think is going to be a high impact quarterback at the NFL level, even as a backup. I worry about his ability to anticipate in the middle of the field, right? Like everyone talks about, oh, he got a minor in the offense last year with Steve Sarkisian, and they're not wrong. He understands the concepts, but I think what separates Tua as a player who, again, is a statue pocket passer and doesn't have a rocket arm is that Tua anticipates, say what you want about Tua, he anticipates better than most quarterbacks in the league. Quinn does not do that at Texas. It is point and shoot. It is that guy is open and I'm waiting for him to come open and now I'm going to throw the ball. And that is just, he can develop. It'll be fine. It's a 7th round pick, but I was dreading the Ewers pick because I knew they liked him last year and I figured it was going to happen. So look, it's a 7th rounder. It's fine. But to me, I just don't really believe in the development track. You got to give me something better than he's a scheme fit and do it for me. Like, I'm sorry. I think that they can do better.
Man, Dante went on the roast of Quinn Ewers today. Eric, look what you made him do.
No. That's not fair. That's not fair to him. I set it up that way. I teed it up that way. That's on me. No, I mean, being serious, I haven't watched enough of Quinn Ewers over the last 2 seasons, and I kind of do want to ask you this, just because it seems like you've watched quite a bit of Quinn Ewers. Is there any credence to the idea that the oblique was sapping some of the arm strength on the 2024 tape? Like, is there a marked difference between 2023 Quinn Ewers in terms of arm strength to 2024 Quinn Ewers?
Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. I think you kind of see it when he returned for the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma. That is some like deeply unserious quarterback tape. Like the first 4 snaps from that game drove me up a wall. And so I think you can kind of see him fighting that a bit during the season. So I do think his arm looks a little bit better in 2023, but I would still tell you it's not very good. I still don't think it's a trait that I think is like high end, right? Like a developmental trait. But yes, you can definitely see a difference with the oblique in 2024. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for battling through that. That's a tough injury for a quarterback to battle through. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me was watching the Texas games where Arch Manning played and watching the games where Quinn Ewers played and just noticing the difference in the offense. And not from a production perspective, from an operational perspective. Like Arch, again, I mean, it would be hard for him not to have a clean operation given his pedigree and who has been teaching him how to play football for his entire life. But you can kind of see the difference in how the offense runs with a player like Arch, who is a little bit cleaner, a little bit faster to process, to make decisions. And so independent of the arm strength concerns, like even in 2024, if I give Ewers a pass for that, I still just like, I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me, but I'm rooting for him. He seems like a good dude. He's got a good story. And I would love to never speak about the Dolphins backup quarterback position again. I would love to just be like, yeah, Quinn Ewers is the dude, and I'm just going to forget about that. That'd be great. So I hope that happens because, this discourse has been rough for the past couple of years. So I'm rooting for Quinn, but I'm very skeptical, even with the oblique, of his arm talent being something that can grow over time.
Well, that the discourse will leak into the 2026 quarterback class, depending on Tua's health, how the offense looks, if Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers can manage in a potential Tua absence. You could have Archie Manning be quarterback 1 for 2020, for 2026. That is to be determined. Dante Collinelli, at Dante Collinelli on Twitter. Thank you so much for being our guest host on the panel on Scouting the Fins. Eric Whittigey, Thank you so much, Coach. We know you're listening. Good luck to your kids at their hockey tournaments, and stick with us here on Scouting the Fins, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed, also on 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, folks, go Fins.